What you have just witnessed is a mock description of what can happen while you are drinking under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Hello, my name is Jan Malkowski, and I'm going to share with you the story of my reality about my son Matthew, who attended Grafton High School when he was a senior in 2010, looking forward to walking across the stage, receiving his diploma, and beginning his college journey that fall. When Mrs. Grant asked me to tell you about my son, I did not hesitate. I'm always happy to talk about my son, and I'm honored when asked to share a story in hopes of saving young lives. This is a passion very, very close to me, and I wanted very much to be here explaining this to you in person. However, I had a previous commitment that left me unable to attend this evening. Matthew was an outgoing, bigger-than personality with friends from not only his senior class, but many underclassmen as well. He was a welcome to many, but not all teachers, coaches, and administration. He was a great hugger. He seemed to find the right words to comfort friends who needed an ear or a shoulder to lean on. And though in my opinion, probably not one of his best qualities, a class clown. He loved to be the center of attention, and though I found this quite annoying, his friends and many of his few teachers found this to be quite endearing of him. His position in baseball was left outfield, and in football as a running back. It was no different with football. The team had not been doing well in their conference in Matthew's day, but that did not stop him from having fun. It was a home game one year. I cannot remember the opposing team. I believe it was the last play of the game, and they were down by 3 points. Grafton was receiving the ball, and it started on the 2nd-yard line. Matthew's quarterback whipped the ball in his direction, knowing he could run like lightning and hoped he could get them within field goal range. But Matty, being Matty, had to be the center of attention, and he ran that ball back for 98 yards and a touchdown. The crowd was roaring, the cheerleaders were jumping up and down, the band was exuberating in celebration, and the school song filled the voices in the stands. He was bombarded by his teammates, but Matty did what he always did when he got a touchdown. He looked for me in the stand. He tapped his heart, threw me a kiss. He said, "I love you, Mom." Friday, March 12th, 2010 was a rainy, foggy day that forever changed the life of my family, this community, and the Grafton High School. Matthew started the day like he did every day, in the weight room, completing his daily workout routine. He went to class, stopped home to grab a quick bite to eat, change his clothes, and was off to work. He took along his books because he was having his first firefighting exam for the state that Saturday. He was very excited and confident about the exam. He had been studying since January, and he had had his dad and his firefighter family helping him to prepare for this day. The morning rain continued to increase, stronger by the hour, and by the time Matt's shift started, the fog was already rolling in. Even though he worked only 2 minutes from home, like all moms, I was worried about the weather, and I would feel relieved once his shift ended and he was back home safe and sound. It's a loss every year for about 6 years in a row at Grafton, and it left parents with an uneasy feeling. But like all teenagers, Matt looked forward to the weekend, and even though he had a test on Saturday, he called me after his shift at about 9 p.m. and asked if he could go by a friend's house for about an hour. I was very leery as the weather was very bad and the roads that he would travel had no lights, and the fog was now thick as pea soup. I suggested he best pass for tonight and plan to meet tomorrow night because, as I'm sure you know, there is always something going on all weekend, every day, with all you kids. Anyway, he could have just called and said, I'm going, but he was respectful enough of me, as his mom, to ask my permission, rather than just do what he wanted. He said he would only be about an hour because he wanted to come home and study before he went to bed for his test tomorrow. 11, 11:15, 11:30. His dad is now asleep, and I'm starting to panic. 11:35, 11:40, 11:45. No text or call from my son. Totally out of character for him, and I was downright worried. Midnight and still no word. I didn't want to call him in case he was driving, and I knew how bad the weather was, so I just waited. At 12:15 a.m., every parent's fear became ours when the doorbell rang. There was a pit in my stomach, and I remember jumping up on the bed and leaping off as I ran for the front door. There stood a sheriff's deputy. Before I could even ask him in, I asked him where my son was and if he was okay. He said he did not know my son and that he was only there to verify if I owned a 1992 tan Honda Accord with Matt's plate number on it. Even now, as I tell you this, I have that pit in my stomach. It never goes away. I told him yes, and I did want to know where my son was. Again, he said he did not know and he had to go to his squad and he would be back in a moment. My husband was out of bed at this time, but I was on the verge of throwing up and crying. The sheriff returned and informed us that he had no further information and that the sheriff's office would be calling us momentarily. And he left. 15 more minutes had passed, and there was still no phone call. My husband was too now starting to get worried and anxious, and decided to call dispatch to see what was going on with our son. Thankfully, because he was on the fire department and he was well known by dispatchers, he was able to get information. I could hear the dispatcher telling David he was sorry there had been a 2-vehicle accident on Highway I in Pleasant Valley. He said one victim was taken to St. Mary's Ozaki and the other was taken to the Freighter Trauma Center in Milwaukee. They had tried to lift that person for flight for life, but it was too foggy to get it off the ground, and that our son was at the trauma center. And so began our nightmare. We arrived at the Freighter Medical Center and were met by a member of security who took us to the trauma admitting center. When we arrived, we were asked to show our IDs, but more terrifying, I was asked if I had a picture of my son. And I thought, my God, how bad is he hurt? Very few words were spoken, and my imagination was going to some very bad places. We were taken into a private room, which we shortly learned was right next to the room where the staff was working on Matthew. We were told that the doctor would be in momentarily with an update, hoping that this would not be another long wait. It wasn't. One door closed and another opened, and in walked the doctor. The first thing he asked me was, did I have a photo of my son? Again, my mind was racing. After seeing Matthew's picture, he said, "Yes, this is the young man I am working on in the next room. I want to prepare you as best as I can for what you are about to see. I am completely broken, sobbing uncontrollably, and just want to see my son." The doctor told us he was in critical condition, in a coma, that they had placed a stent in his head to help slow down the swelling of a brain bleed. There was massive road rash on his body, and he said he would only give us a few minutes because they had not yet completely stabilized Matthew, and they were still assessing his injuries. We were able to kiss him and tell him that we loved him, but we could not touch him. The tears were rushing like a river. I thought I would throw up right there. I didn't even realize I was wailing so loud with a mother's pain, feeling absolutely helpless until the doctor said we had to leave. And as I left the room, many of the staff were also sobbing. Finally, at 6:30 a.m., the doctor came in to us and said that Maddie had been stabilized and transferred to the neurological intensive care unit. As we entered his room, there he laid, on life support, the stent in his head now connected to a machine that measured his brain waves. IVs everywhere. His hair was matted in blood. The doctor finished and said he would return in a bit to check on Matthew. Nurses were in and out of the room, and it felt like a revolving door spinning out of control, with staff giving us information and which procedures were still to be completed. I don't know that my husband and I heard a word that they spoke. We were on autopilot, trying to hear what they could say, but we knew we weren't comprehending. At one point, Maddie's assigned trauma nurse entered the room and asked everyone to leave. She told us her name was Patty. Patty apologized for the overflowing commotion, but said we would be seeing a lot of that. She said the attending doctor, who was the doctor we first met in the ER, would be in soon to let us know about Matthew's injuries. She had a very gentle look in her eyes and a motherly composure about herself that immediately made me feel safe. It was not long, and the doctor came in with Maddie's assessment. His left lung was completely collapsed. His right lung was bruised. There was a brain bleed that they were watching. He had a broken clavicle, shattered pelvis. Both upper and lower teeth were completely broken, shattered. They would need to be replaced at a later date. And of course, there was the massive road rash. Patty returned to see if we had any questions or needed anything. There wasn't much information given to us as far as the specialists were concerned, so we were just waiting for them. She said each team would be in and see us throughout the morning, afternoon, and evening. It would be a long day, and we likely would only hear the worst parts of their report. And at the end of the day, Patty and Maddie's doctor called us into the conference room. They did not ever speak in front of the patients because they believed even in a comatose patient, they could possibly hear. All I was hearing was that he would not survive. His doctor said to wait for the neurologist. He was the one who would have the best answers, and the reason he was not coming until Monday was because he was one of the country's best neurologists, and he was flying in from the West Coast. That night I sat at my son's side, holding his hand. I was bargaining with God, begging Maddie to please wake up. He has so much to do. I guess it must have been the adrenaline, because I do recall not sleeping or eating for 72 hours. It was now Sunday morning, and my husband was going to bring our daughter up to see him. An absolutely heartbreaking moment when she saw him for the first time. She broke out in pain and tears and turned her head into her father's chest. My heart was yet again in pieces. And I asked her if she wanted to come and sit with me and hold Maddie's hand. She shook her head with total fear. Patty came in and introduced herself. Again, there was that gentleness about her that seemed to ease our daughter. Patty told her she didn't have to go close to Maddie until she was ready. Or not at all if she didn't want to. Emily seemed relieved. And she was sitting in the chair crying, whimpering, trying to be strong. 6 hours later, she finally said, "Mom, I'm ready to see my brother." She came over by me, sat in my lap, took his hands, and in her tiny little voice said, "Hi, Maddie, it's Emily. You need to hurry up and get back home so we can throw the football in the house and break some more of Mom's things." I just cried in silence. She talked to him like he would somehow speak to her, telling him about all the kids at school praying for him, how the football, basketball, baseball, track, and gymnasts were all making him cards. Said he'd get well, and that people are bringing meals to the house. There was some really great desserts, but that he need not worry because she would be sure to eat his share, unless he could hurry up and get home. She told him about her basketball team, that they were in first place right now, and that she hates math and wishes he could be home, teaching her all the shortcuts like he knew. And within minutes, she too was asleep. And it's one of my most cherished memories of those two. David took her home around midnight. He had to be back by 6 a.m. Monday morning, March 15th. The neurologist was on time, to the minute. We were anxious to hear what he had to say. It would not be good. He introduced himself, said he had seen all of Matt's scans and images, and very bluntly said, "What you see is what you're going to get." And after 3 weeks, he was stable enough to be moved to Sacred Heart Rehabilitation, one of the best rehab centers in the country, and we still had hope. The fire department came to pick up Matthew in a brand new rig. I remember this day quite well. It was April 15th. It was warm and sunny. And when they took Matthew outside on the stretcher, there was just a very light breeze that went across his face. And he almost moved like, "Gosh, Mom, this feels good." And a butterfly flew by. And when I watched them take him to rehab and put a comb in his hand, and he wasn't able to hold it and it fell down to his side, I thought, what is the point of this? Why are they doing this? And I talked to my husband and I said, "I think we need to bring our son home." For 10 days, Maddie lived. And on the morning of April 30th, 2010, I was lying in bed holding him. His bed was in the living room. His nurse walked through the front door, another angel. And Kim looked at me and she said, "Oh, Jan, you need to call Dave. It's going to be soon." And David came home. He worked right across the street, was there in minutes. And as I held my son, he labored really, really hard to breathe. He couldn't get air in or push it out. He was so tired. And I didn't want to let go. And it was getting to be too much. And I just held him close and I lied and I said, Maddie, if you're ready, I'm ready. And he took his last breath and he passed. And now Matthew's death had been ruled homicide by vehicular manslaughter. And there would be a court date and a sentencing. His service was incredibly emotional. There were over 2,000 people that came to visit our son. I didn't even know he touched that many lives. 600 fire and police personnel from Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota came to pay their respects to my 18-year-old son, who was not yet a certified firefighter. Service was over. Maddie is gone. Life goes on, but it really doesn't. Our family dynamics have been changed forever. Our relationships are all a mess. I'm emotional and I express all my feelings. My husband and my daughter are the opposite, and they squish everything down and just pretend not to talk about it. It's been 13 years. It feels like yesterday. I don't know that we will ever completely recover, but we are doing the best we can with what we have. And we keep memory alive of Maddie through memorials, especially the Matthew Malkowski Memorial Baseball Field that we built for him and dedicated in 2020. That's all I have left. He didn't get to watch his sister walk down the aisle this year and get married. He'll never graduate from college and get that job and his dream house and his family. I'll never have grandchildren from him. But I can guarantee you this community will never forget Matthew Malkowski. Personally, individually, or as a group would like to learn more, please contact Mrs. Grant or Craig Poplar, and they can get in touch with me. I thank you for allowing me to share my story, and I hope if I can just get through to one of you, I will have saved your life, because you're worth it. And I can guarantee you your parents would rather pick you up drunk from a party than be planning your funeral.